Welcome to this explainer. Okay, so if you've ever gone down the rabbit hole of eyelash lifts, you definitely know the drill, right? You see those stunning before and after photos and those totally reassuring beauty blogs telling you it's just a completely harmless way to wake up looking flawless. But today, we are going to do an investigative deep dive into the true safety of this procedure. We're going to cut right through the beauty industry's standard marketing fluff and look directly at what the clinical, peer-reviewed evidence actually says. So, here's our roadmap for today. We'll be covering the reality of eyelash lifts, the chemistry of the curl, documented risks and reactions, who absolutely must avoid this treatment, how to find a qualified technician, and finally, the serious danger of at-home kits. Let's get into it. Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1. The reality of eyelash lifts. It's the exact question millions of us type into search engines every single year. Are eyelash lifts actually safe? And if you ask a standard beauty blog, the answer is usually this enthusiastic, yes, absolutely. But honestly, that answer is missing some vital medical nuance. We have to remember here, we're not talking about applying a simple hair mask or getting a quick manicure. We're talking about a treatment happening in a uniquely sensitive anatomical location. The stakes are just so much higher than your average trip to the salon.
Think about the real tension here. During a lift, your lashes are literally glued back to your eyelid, and these chemical solutions are applied millimeters, and I mean literally millimeters, from your cornea, your conjunctiva, and your meibomian glands. Now, those are the tiny oil glands that keep your eyes lubricated for your entire life. So we really need to shift our mindset away from seeing this as just another simple cosmetic routine. Because of this extreme proximity to the eye surface, a lash lift is incredibly close to being a full-on medical procedure.
Section 2. The chemistry of the curl.
To really understand the safety, we've got to understand the science of how this treatment alters your hair structure permanently. The whole procedure fundamentally relies on a two-step chemical process. Step 1 involves a lifting solution. What this does is it physically breaks down the disulfide bonds in the keratin structure of your lashes. It literally breaks the protein down so the hair can be reshaped. Then, step 2 is the neutralizer. This usually uses hydrogen peroxide, typically between 1 and 3%, to basically reform those bonds and lock that new curl into place. And as you might guess, hydrogen peroxide at those concentrations? Yeah, that is a known ocular irritant if it gets anywhere near the surface of your eye.
But hey, the plot thickens a bit when we look at the specific chemicals used for step 1. Turns out, not all lifting solutions are created equal. Ammonium thioglycolate is kind of the traditional choice, but it has a super high pH, making it really irritating. Then there's thioglycolic acid. Highly effective, sure, but it carries a significant risk of ocular toxicity, like it's heavily flagged in clinical optometry. On the flip side, modern formulations are thankfully moving towards cysteamine hydrochloride, which offers a much safer profile. It's got a lower pH and is just significantly gentler on the eye area. Honestly, knowing exactly which chemical your tech uses is half the battle here.
Oh, and while we're on the subject of chemicals, if you're thinking of combining your lift with a tint, beware of PPD, or paraphenyldiamine. It is a massive source of severe, delayed allergic reactions. And get this, shockingly, it is not FDA approved for use anywhere near the eyes. It kind of sits in this wild regulatory gray area, and it's something you absolutely need to be highly aware of.
Moving to Section 3. Documented risks and reactions.
Now we're going to separate those glossy marketing promises from the actual peer-reviewed optometry outcomes. We want pure facts here, no fear-mongering. First up, toxic keratoconjunctivitis. I know, it sounds incredibly intimidating, but to put it really simply, this is what happens when a technician mistakenly allows those chemical lifting solutions or neutralizers to actually migrate into the eye itself. It causes burning, severe redness, excessive tearing, and sometimes even temporary vision changes. This is an acute reaction, meaning you're going to feel it almost immediately if that boundary is breached.
Next, we have allergic contact dermatitis. Now, unlike a chemical burn, this is an immune sensitization response, often to the PPD in those tints we talked about or the thioglycolate in the lift itself. What makes this one so tricky is that it's delayed. The redness, the swelling, the blistering, it might not even show up until 24 to 48 hours after your appointment. And, this is exactly why a patch test is absolutely critical. Even if you've had a lash lift before and tolerated it perfectly fine, your immune system can actually develop this sensitization over time.
And this brilliantly illustrates a crucial reason why precise application really matters: meibomian gland damage. Remember those tiny glands at your lid margin that produce the protective oil layer for your tears? Well, if harsh chemicals come into contact with the lid margin, they can actually destroy these glands. And the terrifying part? Unlike the surface of your eye, which is pretty good at healing itself rapidly, meibomian glands do not regenerate. Once they're gone, they're gone. Damage here can literally lead to chronic, irreversible dry eye.
Which brings us to Section 4. Who must avoid this treatment?
Let's pivot from the clinical risks over to empowerment. Who needs to avoid this treatment entirely? Because for some of us, regardless of how skilled the technician is, this procedure is just a categorical no. The crucial point here is identifying these absolute contraindications. Say you have an active eye infection, like a stye or conjunctivitis. You simply cannot apply chemicals to that compromised tissue. If you've had recent eye surgery, like LASIK for example, you generally need to wait at least 6 months and get clearance from your surgeon. Similarly, if you're dealing with active eczema or psoriasis right around the eyes, your skin barrier is already broken, which basically creates a fast track for chemical injury. And obviously, any known allergy to acrylites or perm solutions means you absolutely must skip this treatment entirely.
Beyond those absolute contraindications, there are also some special precautions to keep in mind. If you wear contact lenses, you've got to remove them before the treatment and keep them out for at least 24 hours. Why? Because those lenses can actually trap straight chemicals right against the surface of your eye, drastically increasing the risk of a burn. And for our pregnant viewers tuning in, while there isn't definitive proof that a single treatment harms fetal development, the vast majority of healthcare providers strongly recommend avoiding this completely during the first trimester, purely out of an abundance of caution.
Okay, Section 5. Finding a qualified technician.
So let's say you are a great candidate for this. How do you go about vetting a professional to ensure your own safety and peace of mind? Let's look at the absolute non-negotiables. First, they need verified lash lift specific certification. We're not just talking about a general cosmetology license here. Second, a mandatory patch test 24 to 48 hours before your appointment. Seriously, if a tech tells you that you don't need one, just walk right out. And third, complete product transparency. If you ask them exactly what active chemical is in their lifting solution, they should be able to tell you immediately, no hesitation. These are the load-bearing conditions for a safe appointment.
Now, these non-negotiables build directly into the essential safety standards you should see during your actual visit. You want to actively look for a technician who asks you about your medical history right up front. Also, they should strictly be using single-use, disposable silicone shields and tools, and, perhaps most importantly, they need to know exactly how to execute an emergency eye flush protocol if something happens to go wrong.
Moving to our final part, Section 6, the danger of at-home kits.
We really need to take a firm, evidence-based stance against this rising DIY trend we're seeing all over social media. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stark contrast between these two environments. In a professional setting, you have a trained technician carefully applying chemicals while your eyes are fully closed and completely shielded. But look at the at-home reality. To do this yourself, you have to literally glue your own eye open. Your natural protective blink reflex is just completely disabled. You're applying straight-up acids right next to your cornea with a compromised view and absolutely zero professional training on processing times. It's a terrifying anatomical reality and a massive, massive risk to your vision.
Which finally brings us to the ultimate consensus from eye care professionals. They all agree that the risks of lash lifts are very real. But, and this is key, they are concentrated in specific failure modes that are entirely preventable. The procedure isn't categorically dangerous, but it is certainly not categorically safe either. Its safety is wholly 100% dependent on professional, properly trained execution.
And that leaves us with one final provocative question for you to consider before you book your next appointment. Does your beauty studio actually meet these load-bearing safety conditions? You now have the knowledge. You know the exact chemistry, the clinical risks, and the non-negotiable standards required to protect your eye health. So don't be afraid to demand these standards. Because honestly, when it comes to your eyes, you can literally never be too careful. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.